All right, so we're diving into a case today that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, even if you're not from Australia.
Oh, yeah. This one is, well, it's truly a landmark case
Yeah,
in so many ways.
definitely. I mean, the Azaria Chamberlain case, it's one of those stories that just grabs you, you know?
Absolutely.
It's got everything, like a family vacation gone wrong, mystery, intrigue,
Wild animals.
wild animal. Oh, yeah, definitely wild animals. And then the media frenzy, and of course, the courtroom drama.
It really captivated the world, didn't it?
It did. I mean, a family camping trip to Uluru back in 1980. Their baby, Azaria, disappears. And then there's that chilling cry from the mother, Lindy, a dingo's got my baby.
A line that became, well, infamous, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it did. But was it true?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And that's what we're going to try and unpack today. We've got eyewitness accounts, forensic reports, court transcripts, all kinds of stuff. We're going to lay it all out, see what we can make of it.
Should be fascinating. The case really digs into the whole idea of truth versus perception.
Oh, yeah, definitely. How a story, once it gets out there, can take on a life of its own.
Exactly.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's back up a bit.
Okay, good idea. Back to the beginning.
To August of 1980. The Chamberlains, Lindy, Michael, and their 3 kids, including 9-week-old Azaria, they were on a camping trip to Uluru. It was a different time back then, No fancy glamping or anything.
Right, roughing it.
Yeah, proper outback camping. And, dingoes, they were a known presence in the area, even back then.
It's important to remember that these weren't your typical completely wild dingoes.
Oh, how so?
Well, they were used to being around people, scavenging for food, not exactly afraid of humans.
Huh. See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that piece of information becomes, well, it's really crucial later on.
I bet. And even before Azaria disappeared, Lindy had mentioned seeing a dingo kind of watching them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she even said something like it was casing the baby. Pretty creepy, right?
Chilling. It definitely adds to the whole mystery.
Right. So, picture this. It's the evening of August 17th. The Chamberlains are having dinner with some other campers. Typical Aussie campground scene, right?
Right, I can picture it. Fire going, people chatting.
Exactly. So Lindy puts Azaria down to sleep in their tent. And then, not long after, you hear this scream. Lindy yelling, my God, a dingo has got my baby!
Chaos, I imagine.
Oh, absolute chaos. Everyone's searching, using torches and whatnot. There's a floodlight. Aboriginal trackers are called in. The whole campground is on edge.
It's a parent's worst nightmare.
No kidding. They find some clues early on, drops of blood in the tent, dingo tracks, even an imprint in the sand that looked like something knitted, but nothing concrete,
Just these little pieces adding to the puzzle, or maybe creating more questions.
Exactly. And this is where things start to get, a little complicated.
Yeah, I was about to say, the plot thickens.
It does. The police start investigating, and their initial reports, they kind of paint Lindy in a negative light. Like she's too calm, too detached,
Interesting. Even before they have any real evidence.
Right. It's almost like they already have a story in mind.
The power of first impressions. And in a case like this, with so much media attention, well, those early impressions can really stick.
Yeah, definitely. And the media, they were all over this story. Every little detail, every inconsistency, it was front page news.
And that kind of coverage, it can have a huge impact on public opinion.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
People start forming opinions before they even know all the facts.
Happens all the time.
So we've got the initial chaos, a mother's claim, and then this cloud of suspicion starts to form. And then a week later, a tourist finds some of Azaria's clothing near a dingo lair.
Okay, so that seems like it would support Lindy's story, right?
You'd think so. But the clothes, they're blood-stained but surprisingly intact.
Now that is odd.
Right, and this is what really throws everyone for a loop. How could a dingo take the baby but leave the clothes behind? It just didn't seem to add up.
So that's where the first inquest comes in.
It does. And the inquest concludes that, a dingo was probably responsible for Azaria's death, but they also raise questions about the clothing, the bloodstains, the whole thing.
So even with that initial ruling, there's still this lingering doubt.
Oh, absolutely. And that doubt, it only grows from there. So much doubt. And then, of course, comes the trial.
The trial of the century, they called it.
They did, and for good reason. It was all anyone was talking about.
Oh, yeah, it was massive. And the atmosphere in the courtroom, electric.
I bet. So how did the prosecution lay out their case? I mean, they were going for murder, right?
Right. They were trying to paint a picture of, premeditation. They argued that Lindy, for whatever reason, took Azaria to the car, used something sharp, like maybe scissors, and killed her.
Wow. That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is. And they were basing it on, well, mainly two things.
Which,
First, there was the blood they said they found in the Chamberlain's car. They claimed it was fetal blood.
meaning it had to be Azaria's, right?
Right. And the second thing was about the damage to Azaria's clothing. They had these forensic experts who said the tears and cuts, they looked more like they were from scissors or something, not from a dingo.
So they were really pushing that the dingo story was impossible.
Oh, yeah. They even brought in a dingo expert. And he said, based on jaw size and all that, there's no way a dingo could have carried a baby away.
But didn't the defense challenge that? I mean, it seems like a pretty big claim to just leave unchallenged.
Oh, they did. They showed a photo of a dingo, and get this, it was holding a baby-sized doll in its mouth.
No way. Talk about a visual aid.
It was perfect.
Yeah.
He basically had to admit that, well, maybe he was wrong.
That must have been a pretty satisfying moment for the defense.
I'm sure it was. They were really good at highlighting the holes in the prosecution's story. They had witnesses who backed up Lindy's account of that night. Even one who said they heard a baby cry right before Lindy started screaming.
And I'm guessing they emphasized the dingo tracks, the imprint in the sand, all that stuff they found at the scene.
Oh, absolutely. They kept hammering home the point that, hey, there was physical evidence that pointed to a dingo.
So it really sounds like it was a back and forth battle. What was the feeling in the courtroom? Could you sense which way the jury was leaning?
It was hard to say, honestly. But I will say this. The media coverage was relentlessly negative towards Lindy. Everything about her was scrutinized.
That's rough. You know, sometimes it feels like a trial is less about the evidence and more about public perception.
You're not wrong. And in this case, well, public opinion was definitely swayed by the media.
So after all the arguments, all the testimony, the jury reached a verdict.
They did. And they found Lindy Chamberlain guilty of murder.
Wow. I mean, I know this story, but it's still shocking to hear.
It was a huge moment. Lindy was sentenced to life in prison. Michael got a suspended sentence. It felt like the end, like the story was over.
But it wasn't, was it? Because there's so much more to the story.
Oh, so much more. The fight for the truth, it was just beginning.
Guilty, sentenced to life in prison. You know, it's hard to imagine what must have been going through Lindy Chamberlain's mind at that moment.
It's a really difficult thing to grasp. You know, the feeling of being wrongly accused, convicted, imprisoned for something you didn't do.
Absolutely. But even with that verdict, the story doesn't end there.
Right. Oh, not at all. In fact, you could say that's where the real fight begins, the fight for justice.
And Lindy, she never gave up, did she? Even while she was in prison.
She was adamant about her innocence. And thankfully, she had a lot of people on the outside who believed her too. People who kept pushing, kept raising questions.
So what were some of the, I guess, turning points? What were the things that started to chip away at that guilty verdict?
Well, there were a few things. Appeals were filed, of course. But there was also this growing unease about the evidence. People started taking a closer look at the forensic analysis, the blood tests, and, well, let's just say there were some doubts.
Ah, okay. So the science was starting to come under scrutiny.
Exactly. And then there was this one event that really changed everything.
What was that?
In 1986, a park ranger at Uluru, he stumbled upon something pretty incredible.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What did he find?
A tiny little jacket. A matinee jacket, to be precise.
A jacket? Okay, but I don't.
It was Azaria's. The jacket that the prosecution had insisted didn't exist. The one they used as evidence against Lindy.
No way. Wait, are you serious?
I am. And get this, the jacket was found near some dingo lairs. Talk about a bombshell.
That's incredible. I mean, that completely changes the story, doesn't it?
It did. It blew the case wide open. And because of that discovery, they launched a royal commission.
A whole commission. Wow.
Yeah, they basically re-examined the entire case top to bottom.
Wow.
And this time they had the benefit of, well, new scientific advancements, new ways of analyzing evidence that weren't available back in 1980.
So this commission, did it lead to Lindy's release?
It did. In 1988, after years of wrongful imprisonment, Lindy and Michael Chamberlain were finally exonerated.
Exonerated. Finally, justice served.
It was a huge victory, not just for Lindy and her family, but for everyone who believed in her innocence.
But even with the exoneration, the story wasn't quite over, was it?
Not quite. It took until 1995 for a fourth inquest to be held. And in that inquest, they officially changed Azaria's death certificate. The cause of death was listed as unknown, but they acknowledged that a dingo attack was the most likely explanation.
So, after all these years, all the twists and turns, the truth finally came out. It's a powerful story, a reminder that sometimes, even when things seem hopeless, justice can prevail.
It is. But it's also a reminder that the system, well, it isn't perfect. And
Oh.
sometimes it takes a lot of fighting, a lot of people speaking up to
Hmm.
make things right.
Absolutely. And for Lindy Chamberlain, it wasn't just about proving her innocence, was it?
No. She became an advocate, a voice for others who had been wrongly convicted. She used her experience to try and make a difference, to prevent something like this from happening again.
It's inspiring, really, to go through something so traumatic and then come out the other side fighting for justice.
It speaks volumes about her character, her strength.
It does. So, I guess if there's one thing our listeners take away from this deep dive, what would you want it to be?
I think it's the importance of questioning, of not accepting things at face value. The media can be powerful, public opinion can be swayed, but ultimately the truth matters. And sometimes finding the truth takes time. It takes perseverance.
And sometimes it takes a little bit of luck. I mean, if that park ranger hadn't found that jacket,
Who knows how long it would have taken for the truth to come out?
it makes you think, doesn't it? About all the cases out there, the stories we haven't heard, the injustices that might still be hidden.
It does.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. The Azaria Chamberlain case, it's a story that continues to fascinate, to challenge us, and to remind us that the fight for justice is never truly over.
Well said.